In honor of Denver's decriminalization of magic mushrooms, doctors of Reddit, what, if any, is your best story of patients on hallucinogenics? Had a woman come into the ED after ingesting some PCP. She was convinced she was dead and kept telling me she didn't get her last rites. At one point she stripped off all her clothes and shat the bed. Also mistook me for Jesus at one point. She was freaking out for nearly 24 hours. How did PCP ever get popular? Literally every story I have heard about it involves someone freaking out and getting violent. I'm not a doctor, but I was working as a paramedic at a music festival when we got called to a kid tripping on who knows what. The guy had climbed to the top of a portable generator stadium light. So he's 20 feet in the air, on a light pole staring into this blazing midnight sun screaming, "I'm a moth, go into the flame." We had several cops, firefighters and myself standing at the base for 30 minutes discussing how to get him down without killing him or us. The entire time a crowd of people on drugs is surrounding us to see how it all plays out. Do we get a ladder truck and try to coax him down? What if he won't go? Do we spray mace up there? What if he falls? All of a sudden this greasy looking janitor walks up, turns off power to the generator, turns on his flashlight, and aims it at the Mothman. Dude looks at the flashlight on the ground, scambles down and follows it to the medical rent like a puppy about to get a snack. I'm embarrassed that none of us thought about that. That guy partied hard back in the day. This wasn't his first Mothman rodeo. As a nurse, patient came in running in the air asking for a blood transfusion cause he believed that vampire bit his neck. Patient has no any visible marks or scars. Held him down for a while and asked him to calm down. He was so frightened that he asked for garlic to keep the vampires away. Eventually he calmed down and walked out on his own with no problem. Hope that you're reading this. I wanna take what you're taking. I had a patient who had taken an ungodly amount of Benadryl in a failed suicide attempt. A lot of people think that, since it makes you drowsy, a bunch of it might be able to kill them in their sleep. Instead of killing them though, Benadryl basically gives you absolutely terrifying hallucinations for like 24 hours or more, and then leaves you with the worst multi-day hangover you have ever had in your life. He would not stop yelling and screaming about that damn cat poking its head out of the ceiling tiles every single time I left the room. He also had short bursts of thinking he was covered in bugs and I would find him stripped naked and yelling into the wall. Was working night shift on inpatient service. Ed called to admit someone. We've got a 17-year-old down here with altered mental status. We think he needs to be admitted for eval/monitoring, VSS, chemical fine, etc. etc. Now, I'm not a pediatrician. I don't do kids. I don't understand why the Ed is calling me. But, I'm an intern and it's 2 in the morning, so arguing about it is stupid. I headed to the addition. I get there to see a young dude sitting there with his parents. I'll mention that his dad was a full bird colonel and very much fit the archetype, and his mom seemed to fit that type of personality too. The kid is literally rolling around in his bed, alternating between crying, asking if he was going to die, rubbing his dad's hand, and telling him how much he loved him. I had to sit there and take a history with a straight face from a 17-year-old who kept being distracted by just how much he loved his dad. I think my first question was, "Did you take anything tonight?" And he was straight up and said, "Oh, yeah, like a shit ton of acid. Want any?" I 100% laughed at this statement. His dad was not amused. The patient was discharged the next morning. It was nice of him to offer to share. I had a guy who was freaking out thinking he was going to die because he thought he had eaten too many hallucinogenic mushrooms. He went online and saw that sometimes patients are given activated charcoal to soak up the mushrooms in the stomach. Not entirely true BTW. So he goes outside and starts chowing down on charcoal briquettes that he has in his garage for grilling. After about a dozen he realizes, holy shit, I'm eating charcoal briquettes. Now he is really freaking out, so he grabs his dog, Asla thinks he is never coming back to his house, and drives himself to the addition. He parks out front, walks into Tridge with the pup, black charcoal all over his face and hands, and says, "I need a doctor and someone to watch my dog when I die." That's actually really considerate of the dog, if he was worried that nobody else would show up to take care of it in time following his demise. I'm an anesthetist at a major hospital in Georgia. During a C-section the epidural seemed to not fully be working, and the patient was feeling pain, so we were forced to give ketamine. Ketamine has many effects, and one of which is profound pain blocking, analgesia. It's safe to use in this case, because it won't stop the baby from breathing like morphine or fentanyl would. Ketamine also causes hallucinations, like severe hallucinations. Patient stopped screaming from pain, and began screaming from the dragons. Oh shit. Oh shit. AHHH. Get them away, while being totally pain-free and comfortable. It was not in a terrified way, but more of an excited I can't believe it kind of way. When the baby came out and began crying, it turned to what in the fuck is that? Oh my god. That lasted a solid 20 minutes. Edit. Thanks for the gold. First gold coin ever. Got high. Had a kid. Saw dragons. All in the same day. Lucky patient. Had a friend become impatient with mushrooms once. He took an eighth, and an hour later decided they weren't very strong. So the most logical thing to do would be eat his other eighth. Cut to 2 hours later, and he is parked on top of a parking garage. Tried to drive across town when they kicked in, and he immediately realized his fuck up. He tried to wait it out, but after being abandoned by everyone else, I wasn't around. No way in hell would I have left the poor guy on 7 grams of shrooms to his own devices, and he decides he needs help. So he calls 911. While on the phone he wants to be as honest as possible, so he tells them about his .22 caliber rifle behind the seat of his truck. Only it comes out as, there's a gun in the car. He says he was tripping and sweating so badly, it was July. The next thing he remembers is hearing a tink 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 and looking up to being surrounded by police, guns drawn and ready for anything. Friend isn't a danger though, so they get him in an ambulance and give him charcoal to induce vomiting. The rest of the night is a blur for him, and he wakes up cuffed to the bed. They ask him if there's anyone he can call for a ride, and he tells them his mom is a nurse who works on the 2nd floor. Apparently while tripping he kept telling them to go upstairs and get mom, so they all have a chuckle realizing his mom really was upstairs. Dude, I couldn't tell you where my left hand was on 7 grams of shrooms, much less my mother. I was a doctor that was on rotation in the emergency department. 33-year-old male who was brought in naked by the police under the influence of suspected mushroom ingestion. He had a bit of trouble understanding why he'd been arrested, despite being very aware of the fact that he'd been caught gallivanting around naked in the rain in a children's playground. The initial police response had been with 2 officers, and he told me with glee that they weren't able to grab him because he was slippery like an oiled pig in the rain, and the nakedness didn't help with no clothing for them to grab. Due to being unable to catch him, they called for dog squad backup. He recounted with a shit-eating grin how he'd hidden inside a giant puddle like Rambo and had thrown sticks and rocks to confuse the police dog. Following an hour or so, they gave up and reverted to using a search line of 12 police slowly advancing to find him. Eventually one stumbled into this goblin's little swamp puddle, and then they took another 15 minutes trying to catch him as he bolted naked around the children's playground again. His only regret, despite his wife refusing to come and pick him up from the hospital, was that he hadn't eaten more shrooms. Nurse here. Used to work the night shift in a very small rural ed in North Carolina. We had a couple in their 20s get picked up the local police. They were found in their car stopped on the train tracks looking very lost and confused. They had somehow made it from Raleigh and were attempting to get to the beach. We don't know exactly when they decided to take the LSD, so they're brought into the ed for an eval before they're let go. This being rural NC, no one had a clue about how to handle this type of situation. We basically gave them force fluids, put them on cardiac monitors, and tried not to stimulate them too much. They were extremely polite, and since I was the closest in age to them and had some experience with recreational drugs, I did my best to engage them. As I was starting and forth on the male partner, I asked how he was feeling. Very safe, he replied. His pupils were as wide as saucers. I miss that job sometimes. When I was a medical student, I saw a guy high as balls on PCP. I was working with a tiny little Asian chick who was a PGY3 resident, and when we walked in the room, this giant naked white dude high as hell sees her and screams that she was the devil or something. Guy lunges at her, and the cop in the room promptly slams him onto the bed. I try to help like any med student working in the field they wanna match in, and I swing around behind the guy who's actively winning the MMA match with the cop and grab him into a chokehold. Excellent bedside manner was a comment I got on my slip that day. I pin him for a femtosecond before he realizes he's crispy as shit on that good old phencyclidine, and he springs his upper body forward, swinging me over the back of the bed seat right onto his lap. It took me like 5 seconds to realize what happened. I know right out of there right before the police tased him into oblivion. Hours later he was asking us rather politely for some orange juice with all 4 limbs restrained. Thanks for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe.